There is a word in modern English used to insult someone with no appreciation for art or culture. Philistine, an uncultured barbarian, a person immune to refinement. But the actual people who once carried that name built some of the most sophisticated pottery, architecture, and urban planning anywhere in the Iron Age Mediterranean. For nearly 3,000 years, almost nobody could say with confidence where they had actually come from. Ancient texts hinted at an answer. Egyptian temple walls hinted at another. The two hints did not fully agree with each other, and neither one was proof. Then, in a port city on the coast of modern Israel, scientists opened a set of graves that had been sitting quietly beneath ordinary house floors for over 3,000 years. What they found in the bones did not simply confirm an old guess. It pointed in a specific geographic direction almost nobody expected to see written into human DNA. And then, within a couple of centuries, it did something even stranger. It disappeared. For most of recorded history, the explanation for the Philistines rested on two ancient sources that rarely get named side by side. The first is the Hebrew Bible itself, which repeatedly describes the Philistines as having come from a place called Kaftor, a name most scholars have long associated with Crete or the wider Aegean world. The second is Egyptian. Carved into the walls of Ramesses, the third's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, dated to around 1175 BCE, are reliefs and inscriptions describing a violent naval and land battle against a loose coalition of seaborne invaders the Egyptians called the Sea Peoples, among them a group named the Peliset. Archaeologists have long linked the Peliset to the Philistines by name alone, one of several named groups in that same relief alongside the Chaker, the Shekelesh, and the Danayan, all lumped together by Egyptian scribes as raiders from across the sea. Decades of excavation at the five core Philistine cities, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza, added circumstantial support, Aegean-style pottery, new architectural forms, and unusual amounts of pig bone in a region where pork had rarely been eaten. The Aegean migration theory became the standard account, taught for generations. It was coherent. It was consistent across several independent lines of evidence. It was also, for most of that time, unprovable. Here is the problem archaeology could describe, but never fully solve on its own. Pottery travels. Architectural styles travel. Even diet can shift through trade, taste, and imitation without a single person actually moving from one place to another. This is a caution every archaeologist learns early, sometimes summarized as, pots are not people. A city can fill up with foreign-style objects while its population stays exactly who it always was. So the Aegean theory, however plausible, rested on material culture that could migrate on its own. What archaeology could not do was look inside an actual human being and ask whether that person's own ancestry had changed. That required a different kind of evidence entirely. One that would not exist until scientists could sequence whole genomes from ancient skeletal remains and compare a population's own DNA across a single, continuously excavated site, layer by layer, generation by generation. Researchers working on this question have generally converged on two very different explanations, and both keep colliding with real limits. The first is the cultural diffusion model. The late Bronze Age Mediterranean was already a dense trading world, documented in the Amarna letters and the archives of Ugarit, where prestige goods, styles, and even foreign foodways spread through elite emulation and commerce alone. Under this model, Philistine material culture could have arrived without a corresponding movement of people at all, adopted the way any coastal trading hub absorbs outside fashions. It is a real, well-evidenced pattern elsewhere in the ancient world. Its limitation is specific. Trade explains why pots move. It does not easily explain a measurable shift in the ancestry of actual buried human beings, particularly infants who never chose or traded anything. At precisely the same historical moment, the pottery styles change. The second explanation is the migration model suggested by the Bible's Kaftir tradition and Egypt's own battle inscriptions, read together rather than separately. The timing fits a real historical catastrophe. Across the last decades of the 13th century BCE and the opening decades of the 12th, the Hittite Empire collapsed. Mycenaean palace centers were destroyed, and the trading city of Ugarit was burned and never resettled, a period historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse. Displaced populations fleeing that collapse, arriving by sea along the Levantine coast, would explain both the Egyptian record of an invasion and the biblical memory of a foreign origin. Its limitation is equally real. Only a handful of individuals have ever been sequenced from this period at any single site, which makes it genuinely difficult to know whether the evidence reflects a full population replacement, a smaller founding group, or something in between. There is a third layer to this problem that the genetic data itself introduced, and it remains unresolved even in the published research. Once scientists confirmed a non-local ancestry component, the next question was where exactly it came from. The modeling pointed broadly to a southern European gene pool as the best available match, but the researchers were explicit that they could not narrow that further, to Crete specifically, to the wider Aegean, or to other parts of the central and western Mediterranean, because ancient reference genomes from that era and that region remain sparse. In other words, the biblical claim of Kaftir is entirely consistent with the DNA. It is just not confirmed by it. The genome raised the same geographic question the text raised roughly 2,500 years earlier without fully closing it. The study responsible for the clearest answer so far was published in Science Advances in 2019, led by Michael Feldman of the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, working with Daniel Master of Wheaton College, who has directed excavation at Ashkelon for decades, and senior author Johannes Krause. The team sequenced genome-wide data from 10 individuals spanning roughly 3,600 to 2,800 years ago, meaning burials ranging from somewhere around 1600 BCE down to around 800 BCE, a genetic time series running from the Bronze Age straight through the early and later Iron Age at a single, continuously excavated site, something almost no other location in the region can offer. All three populations derived most of their ancestry from the local Levantine gene pool, but the early Iron Age individuals, dated to between roughly 3,400 and 3,150 years ago, carried a distinct European-related ancestry component their Bronze Age predecessors simply did not have. As Feldman put it, the timing of that genetic shift lines up with existing archaeological and textual estimates for when the Philistines are thought to have arrived. Then came the twist inside the twist. By the time of Iron Age II, only a couple of centuries later, that European signal was no longer detectable. Daniel Master noted that the people of Ashkelon remained Philistines to their neighbors in every text that mentions them, even after the distinctiveness of their genetic makeup had faded, most likely through generations of intermarriage with the surrounding Levantine population. Think about what that actually means on a human scale, the way you might think about your own family. Imagine a recipe passed down through your household that everyone assumes has always belonged to your family, cooked the same way for as long as anyone can remember. Then you learn that 2 generations back, it did not originate with your family at all. It came from a neighbor, absorbed into your grandmother's kitchen so completely that by the time it reached you, the fact of its origin had simply dissolved into the ordinary texture of home. Nobody was lying about whose recipe it was. It became yours the way most things become truly ours, through years of use, not through a fixed point of origin. That is close to what happened at Ashkelon, at the scale of an entire population, played out across roughly 2 centuries instead of 2 generations. None of this diminishes who the Philistines were. If anything, it makes them considerably more real than either the biblical slur or the Egyptian battle inscription ever allowed them to be. These were not cartoon villains waiting to be defeated by Samson or David. The genetic and archaeological evidence together describe actual refugees from an actual regional collapse, arriving by sea, building a genuine civilization along a coastline far from wherever they had started, and within a few generations, becoming functionally indistinguishable genetically from the people already living there, while remaining culturally and politically Philistine to everyone around them for centuries afterward. Identity, in other words, was never simply a genetic reading. It was a durable social fact that the DNA turns out to be consistent with, but never something the DNA alone created or could have created on its own. Here is the detail that rarely makes it into the headlines about this study. The 10 individuals whose genomes rewrote this question were not warriors, priests, or royalty. Several of the key early Iron Age samples came from infant burials, interred beneath the floors of ordinary Philistine houses, following a known domestic custom of burying infants inside the home itself, rather than in a separate cemetery. The single most consequential piece of evidence in this entire 3,000-year mystery was never sitting in a triumphant temple inscription. It was resting quietly under a kitchen floor, waiting for someone to finally ask it a different kind of question. The Philistines were never who the slur made them out to be. They were people who crossed a sea, built a home, and were absorbed into the place that received them, so completely that their descendants forgot, and their neighbors never fully knew. If a word this old can still be hiding a true story nobody bothered to check for 3,000 years, it is worth asking what else you have accepted as settled that was actually just unexamined. If following this channel means catching the next correction to a story you thought was finished before most people even hear it happened, subscribing is the way to do that. And if this changed how you think about a word you have used your whole life, liking this video helps it reach someone still working from the old version. There is another population on this channel whose accepted origin story quietly came apart under the same kind of genetic scrutiny, linked on screen now. Here is a question worth sitting with. If you learned tomorrow that something you always assumed was purely your family's own had actually arrived from somewhere else and simply been absorbed, would you want to know? Or would you rather it stay exactly as comfortable as it has always felt? Tell me honestly in the comments.